The brothers had already signed when Hanna Carver was led down the stone corridor beneath the Tagus, and the smell of old salt water and copper followed her all the way to the notary's desk. She sat alone in the room they called the Exchange, which had been a customs warehouse in 1755, before the earthquake dropped it into the river and the vampires claimed what drowned. The ceiling vaulted overhead, barnacles still clinging to the arches, and gaslight reflected off black water that lapped at the edges of the floor. Someone had left the contract on the mahogany desk in front of her, 8 pages of cream paper with her name misspelled 3 different ways and her brother's signatures sprawled across the bottom like they'd been drunk when they did it. They probably had been. Hanna picked up the pen someone had left beside the inkwell and began correcting the spelling errors in the margins because her hands needed something to do, and her training wouldn't let her ignore mistakes even now. Surety was spelled with an extra T in paragraph 5. The amount was written in outdated Portuguese escudos instead of euros, which meant the document was either ceremonial or the vampires hadn't updated their forms since 1999. She suspected both. Her brothers owed 400,000 euros to something called the Nightside Credit Exchange, which sounded like a payday loan operation, but was apparently vampire enough to have lawyers who knew how to file blood debt claims in Portuguese maritime court. The debt had been for a shipping container of prescription opioids that Marco and David had promised to move through the port without inspection, except they'd taken payment up front and then lost the container to an actual customs check when they got high on their own supply and forgot to bribe the right inspector. The vampires had not found this amusing. Hanna had found out about it when 2 men in beautiful suits had appeared at her office at the forensic accounting firm in London where she worked, had politely asked her to accompany them to Lisbon, and had made it clear that polite was a courtesy that would not be extended twice. She'd gotten on the plane. She'd walked into the Port Authority building at midnight, had been led down a staff staircase that went much farther down than basements should go, and now she was here, correcting a contract that made her responsible for her brother's debt in a room that smelled like the ocean and old blood. The door opened behind her without a knock. Hanna didn't turn. She finished correcting the date in paragraph 7 and set the pen down. "Miss Carver." The voice was male, low, accented with something older than Portuguese. "You've read the terms." "I've read the spelling errors," Hanna said. She turned in her chair. The man standing in the doorway was not a man, of course. He was tall and slim in a way that suggested strength rather than fragility, dressed in a black suit that looked like it cost more than her annual salary, and his skin was the color of new snow. His hair fell past his shoulders, white blonde and straight, and his eyes were the pale gray of winter ice. He looked perhaps 30, which meant he was probably centuries old, and he carried himself like someone who had never doubted his right to stand exactly where he stood. "Those 2, he agreed. His gaze moved to the contract, then back to her face. "My notary is careless with names he considers temporary." "Is mine temporary?" "That depends on you." He crossed the room in 3 strides that made no sound on the stone floor and picked up the contract. He read through it quickly, his expression unchanging, and when he reached the signature page he paused for a moment that stretched too long. Then he said 4 words. "You deserve better, brothers." And he held the contract over one of the gaslights until it caught fire, the flames eating through 8 pages of legal vampire bullshit and her brother's drunken signatures, and he dropped the burning paper into a copper bowl on the desk where it curled into ash. Hanna stared at the ashes. Her accounting brain tried to calculate what had just happened in terms of liability and asset transfer, but the part of her that had spent 30 years cleaning up after Marco and David understood perfectly. "They still owe you 400,000 euros, she said. "They owe the exchange," the vampire corrected. "And the exchange has been paid by other means. You are not surety for a debt that has been settled." "Then why am I here?" The vampire looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his expression that might have been curiosity or might have been hunger. With vampires it was often both. "Because I wish to see the woman whose credit rating is higher than most EU member states, who has no criminal record, no debts, and no dependents, and who came anyway when her idiot brothers sold her to cover their stupidity." He tilted his head slightly. "I am Iskander Gravori. This is my court, and you are going to stay." It wasn't a question. Stay and do what? Hanna asked. Your work, Iskander said. I need a mortal accountant I can trust, which means I need one who has no connections to the families, the cartels, or the other courts. Your brothers tried to sell you. That makes you remarkably free of obligations to anyone. Except you. I burned your contract, Iskander said. You have no obligation to me, but I am offering you employment, Miss Carver, and I am offering it only once. Hanna looked around the drowned customs house with its barnacled ceiling and its black water and its gas lights that probably cost a fortune to maintain when electric lights existed. She thought about her flat in London with its beige walls and its kitchen that smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs. She thought about Marco and David, who had not called to apologize or explain, who had simply signed her name on a piece of paper and assumed she would handle it the way she always handled their messes. What would I be accounting? She asked. Iskander smiled, and it was the first expression he'd shown that looked genuine. Everything. My house handles 70% of the port's night trade, which means shipping manifests, customs documentation, and 3 centuries of treaties with the Port Authority that define what we can move and when. The court takes a percentage of every transaction, which must be tracked, recorded, and distributed according to bloodline and standing. And someone has been stealing from the distribution for at least 5 years, which means the books are wrong and I need them fixed. You want me to audit a vampire court. I want you to audit my court, Iskander said. And then I want you to find who has been stealing from me so I can remove their head and put it on a pike at the port entrance as a reminder that I do not tolerate theft. It should have sounded insane. It should have sent her running back up the stairs to the surface and the next flight to London. Instead, Hanna heard herself say, I'll need access to all financial records dating back 7 years, full documentation of the treaty structures, and a workspace with proper lighting. Gaslight gives me headaches. Iskander's smile widened just slightly. You'll have it. Your salary will be triple what you made in London, paid in euros, not blood. And you'll have quarters in the East Wing where the sun reaches in the morning if you want it. I want it, Hanna said. Then welcome to the Gravori court, Miss Carver. Iskander offered his hand, and when she shook it, his skin was cool and dry, and his grip was controlled with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much strength he held back. Your brothers are no longer permitted within 5 kilometers of this building or any port property under our treaty. If they approach you, tell me. I will handle it. What did you do to settle their debt? Hanna asked. Iskander released her hand. I bought it from the exchange for the full amount plus interest, and then I transferred it to a collection agency in Macau that specializes in finding people who run. Your brothers left Portugal 3 hours ago on a container ship heading east. I expect they'll be running for a very long time. He said it with no particular emotion, like he was describing the weather, and Hanna realized that this was what mercy looked like from a vampire king. Not forgiveness, just the choice to make the problem someone else's. Thank you, she said, because it seemed like the thing to say. Iskander inclined his head slightly. Your quarters are ready. Severin will show you up. Work begins tomorrow at sunset. He left the way he had come, silent and fast, and Hanna sat alone in the drowned customs house with the ashes of her contract cooling in the copper bowl. A different vampire appeared in the doorway moments later, younger looking than Iskander, with the same white skin and white hair, but a rounder face and a smile that showed too many teeth. Miss Carver, I'm Severin. I'll show you to your rooms. Do you have luggage? 2 men in suits took my suitcase when I arrived. Then it's already in your room. Come on. The stairs are a bitch if you're not used to them. Hanna followed him out of the exchange and through corridors that twisted like intestines through the drowned warehouse, past rooms full of filing cabinets and ancient ledgers, past a hall where vampires in evening clothes stood around talking in low voices that went silent when she passed, past a set of iron doors that looked like they belonged on a bank vault. That's the real archive, Severin said when he caught her looking. 300 years of treaties, contracts, blood bonds, and tax records. You'll probably spend a lot of time in there once Iskander gives you clearance. How long have you worked for him? 60 years, give or take. I was turned during the Carnation Revolution, and he gave me a job when I didn't know what to do with forever. Severin glanced back at her. He's fair if you're worried. Doesn't play games with staff. You do your work, you get paid, you don't steal or betray him, and you'll be fine. And if I do steal or betray him? Severin's smile disappeared. Then you'll be an example, and trust me, you don't want that. They climbed 3 flights of stone stairs that came out in a corridor that looked almost normal. Plaster walls, painted cream, wooden floors, electric sconces that gave off warm light. Severin stopped at a door halfway down the hall and pushed it open. The quarters were beautiful. A sitting room with bookshelves and a desk by the window, a bedroom beyond with an actual 4-poster bed, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that looked original to whatever building this had been before it became a vampire court. The window looked out over the Tagus, the lights of Lisbon reflecting on the water, and Hanna could see the container ports spread out to the east like a field of metal boxes. Her suitcase sat on the bed, unopened. Kitchen is downstairs, 1 floor down and to the left, Severin said. It's stocked with human food. Most of us don't eat, but Iskander keeps staff who do. Breakfast is at 8 if you want company, or you can eat up here. Sunset tomorrow is at 7:43, so work starts at 8. Don't be late. I'm never late, Hanna said. Severin grinned. Yeah, Iskander said you wouldn't be. Sleep well, Miss Carver. He left, and Hanna locked the door behind him even though she suspected locks meant nothing in a house full of vampires. She unpacked her suitcase, hung her 3 work outfits in the wardrobe, and set her laptop on the desk. Then she stood at the window and looked out at Lisbon and tried to understand how her life had become this in the span of 12 hours. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Iskander. The number is for emergencies or questions. Use it. Hanna saved the number and didn't reply. She showered, put on pajamas, and climbed into the 4-poster bed that was more comfortable than anything she'd slept on in years. She thought she wouldn't be able to sleep, but exhaustion took her under in minutes, and she dreamed of drowning customs houses and contracts burning on black water. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of ships' horns in the distance. Her phone said it was 9 in the morning. She'd slept for 8 hours without waking once, which never happened in London. Hanna dressed in one of her work outfits, gray slacks, white blouse, navy blazer, and went downstairs to find the kitchen. It turned out to be a large industrial space with modern appliances and a table that could seat 20. A woman in her 50s sat at one end drinking coffee and reading a Portuguese newspaper. You must be the new accountant, the woman said in accented English. I'm Rosa. I manage the house staff. Coffee? Please, Hanna said. Rosa poured her a cup from a French press and pushed over a plate of pastéis de nata that were still warm. There's bread and cheese in the fridge if you want real food. Iskander said you'd be starting work today. At sunset, Hanna confirmed. She bit into one of the pastries and nearly moaned. These are incredible. There's a bakery 2 streets over that makes them fresh every morning. I pick them up at 7. Rosa folded her newspaper. How much did Iskander tell you about the court structure? Almost nothing. Then I'll give you the version that matters for your work. Iskander is the king, which means he holds the port treaty and controls all night trade through Lisbon's harbor. Under him are 4 high lords who manage different sectors: shipping, banking, real estate, and entertainment. Each lord has a household of vampires who work for them, and each household takes a cut of the profits from their sector. The percentages are defined by bloodline agreements that go back centuries, and the bookkeeping is a nightmare. How much of a nightmare? Rosa smiled grimly. The last accountant quit after 2 months and moved to Brazil. The one before that is in a psychiatric hospital in Porto. And the one before that took a bribe from one of the lords to falsify reports, and Iskander put his head on a pike at the port entrance. Severin mentioned the pikes. They're very effective. No one has tried to bribe an accountant since. Rosa sipped her coffee. Iskander will protect you as long as you're honest. The minute you lie or hide something, you're on your own. He values truth more than loyalty, which makes him unusual for a vampire. Hanna filed that information away in the part of her brain that catalogued people's priorities. What should I know about the High Lords? Casimir handles shipping. He's been with Iskander for 200 years and he's loyal but ambitious. Vivian runs banking and she's vicious but fair. Drakov has real estate and he's old-fashioned. Doesn't like mortals, probably won't like you. and Constantine does entertainment, which means clubs, brothels, and blood dens. He's charming and dangerous, and you should never be alone with him. Noted. The theft Iskander mentioned has been going on for at least 5 years, probably longer. Someone is skimming from the distribution, which means they're either very smart or very connected, possibly both. Rosa stood and collected her coffee cup. You seem competent, Miss Carver. I hope you survived the audit. It wasn't exactly encouraging, but Hanna had worked in forensic accounting long enough to know that the interesting jobs were never safe. She spent the day exploring the parts of the court she could access without permission, mapping the layout in her head. The building was enormous, a labyrinth of drowned architecture and renovated wings, and she got lost twice before finding her way back to her quarters. At 7, she ate dinner in her room, bread and cheese and fruit from the kitchen, and at 7:40 she went downstairs to the office Severin had mentioned was being prepared for her. It was 3 doors down from the exchange, a long room with windows that looked out onto the underwater portion of the building where fish swam past in the black water. Someone had installed bright LED panels in the ceiling and set up a massive desk with 2 monitors, a printer, and a filing cabinet that was already half full of ledgers. Iskander was standing by the desk, reading something on a tablet. He looked up when she entered. Miss Carver, punctual. You said 8. It's 7:42. I appreciate precision. He set the tablet on the desk. This office has access to all financial records for the past decade, both digital and physical. The archive access code is written here. He handed her a card with a 12-digit number printed on it. Severin will escort you to the archive whenever you need it. The filing system is chronological within categorical subdivisions, which means it makes sense once you understand the categories. And the categories are? Treaty income, blood tithe, commercial rent, criminal tribute, and miscellaneous. Iskander pulled out the desk chair. Sit, I'll show you the basics. Hanna sat, and Iskander leaned over her shoulder to wake the monitors. He smelled like cold stone and something darker, like old wine or iron. He pulled up a spreadsheet that made her eyes hurt. Just looking at it, hundreds of rows of transactions in multiple currencies, with reference codes that seemed random. This is 1 month of treaty income, Iskander said. Every ship that docks at night pays a fee based on tonnage and cargo type. The fees are collected by Casimir's people and recorded here. The total should match the treaty tables, which are filed in the archive under T1755A through T2024F. For the past 5 years, the totals have been short by approximately 3%. Hanna scanned the spreadsheet. 3% of what total? Approximately 40 million euros annually. So someone was stealing over €1 million a year. No wonder Iskander wanted heads on pikes. Do you know which category the theft is coming from? Hanna asked. If I knew that, I wouldn't need you. Iskander straightened. Start with treaty income since that's where I first noticed the discrepancy. Work backward through the records and find the pattern. I don't care how long it takes as long as you're thorough. I'll need to interview the people who handle the collections. Casimir will make his staff available. I'll arrange a meeting for tomorrow night. Iskander moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Carver, the person who is stealing from me is likely someone with high access and long tenure. That means they are dangerous, and they will not be pleased when you find them. If anyone threatens you, tell me immediately. Do not try to handle it yourself. I'm an accountant, not a detective. I'm not planning to confront anyone. Good. Confrontation is my responsibility. Iskander's pale eyes held hers. You find the numbers. I will handle the rest. He left, and Hanna turned back to the monitors. She cracked her knuckles, opened a fresh spreadsheet, and started pulling data. The work was actually soothing in its complexity. Numbers didn't lie the way people did, and patterns emerged if you knew how to look. By midnight, she'd identified 15 transactions in the treaty income category that had reference codes that didn't match any ship registry in the Port Authority database. By 2 in the morning, she'd found another 30. By 4, she had a list of 200 questionable transactions spread over 5 years, all of them processed by the same clerk in Casimir's office. She saved her findings, locked the monitors, and went upstairs to sleep for 3 hours before the sun came up. The pattern continued for a week. Hanna worked from sunset to dawn, pulling records and cross-referencing transactions, and Iskander appeared every night around 8 to check her progress. He never stayed long, but his presence was steady, and she found herself looking forward to the brief conversations they had about accounting irregularities and treaty law. On the 8th night, he brought her coffee. "Rosa said you drink it black," Iskander said, setting the cup on her desk. Hanna looked up from the spreadsheet she'd been wrestling with for 2 hours. "You talked to Rosa about my coffee preferences?" "I talked to Rosa about everything. She runs this house more efficiently than I do." Iskander leaned against the desk. "What have you found?" Hanna pulled up the summary file she'd been building. "The theft is definitely coming from treaty income, and it's being processed through a clerk named Antonio who has worked in Casimir's office for 12 years. But Antonio is too junior to be doing this alone. Someone higher up is either directing him or covering for him. Casimir? Possibly. But the pattern suggests someone who understands both the treaty tables and the archive filing system, which means they've been in the court long enough to learn the old systems." Hanna highlighted a section of her timeline. "The theft started small, less than 1% annually, and increased gradually over time. That's classic embezzlement behavior. Start small, see if anyone notices, scale up slowly." Iskander studied the screen. "How much total?" "Just over 6 million euros across 5 years. His expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. "Continue the audit. I want the name of everyone involved. I'll need access to Casimir's personal records." "You'll have it." Iskander straightened. "I'm calling a court session tomorrow night. All 4 High Lords will attend. You will present your preliminary findings." Hanna's stomach dropped. "I've never presented to vampires before." "You've presented to corporate boards full of criminals in expensive suits. This is the same, except the criminals are immortal and the suits are better." Iskander's tone was dry. "You will be under my protection during the session. No one will touch you. What if they don't like what I say? Then they will be unhappy, and I will not care." Iskander moved toward the door. "Prepare your presentation, Miss Carver, and wear something that makes you feel confident. Vampires respect competence, but they test fear." He left, and Hanna stared at the spreadsheet and tried not to panic. The court session was held in a hall that had been a warehouse floor before the earthquake, a vast space with a vaulted ceiling and columns that still showed water damage from 1755. Gaslight and electric light mixed in the sconces, and the floor was polished black marble that reflected everything like dark water. Hanna wore her best suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with heels that made her tall enough to meet most eyes straight on. She carried her tablet and a printed copy of her findings, and she walked into the hall at Iskander's side, trying to project calm she didn't feel. The 4 High Lords sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle at the far end of the hall. Casimir was broad-shouldered and dark-eyed, his white hair pulled back in a tail. Vivienne was slim and sharp-featured, dressed in a black gown that looked like it cost more than a car. Drakov was older-looking than the others, his face lined in a way that suggested he'd been turned later in life, and his expression was already hostile. Constantine lounged in his chair like he was at a beach resort, beautiful and lazy and watchful. Behind them stood their household's 20 or 30 vampires in formal clothes, all of them watching Hanna with the focused attention of predators. Iskander led her to the center of the hall and then stepped aside, leaving her alone in the space between the king and his lords. "Miss Hanna Carver," Iskander said, his voice carrying through the hall without effort. "Forensic accountant, retained by this court to audit our financial records and identify irregularities. She has prepared a preliminary report on the theft from our treaty income. You will listen. You will not interrupt. And when she is finished, you will answer her questions." He sat in a chair that had been placed apart from the others, a throne in everything but name, and looked at Hanna. "Begin." Hanna opened her tablet and projected her spreadsheet onto a screen that had been set up behind her. Her hands were steady. Numbers were easy. Numbers made sense. "Over the past 5 years, the Gravori court has lost approximately 6.2 million euros in treaty income," she said. "The theft has been accomplished through the creation of phantom transactions, false ship registries, that appear in the collection records but do not correspond to any actual vessel docking at the port." She pulled up the list of phantom transactions. These records were entered into the system by a clerk named Antonio Ferreira, who works in the shipping office under High Lord Casimir. However, Antonio does not have the access or the knowledge to create convincing false registries on his own. Someone provided him with the ship details, the cargo manifests, and the treaty codes necessary to make the transactions appear legitimate. Casimir leaned forward. "You are accusing someone in my household of theft." "I am stating that the theft originated in your office," Hanna said. "Whether the person responsible is in your household or has access to your systems is a question I cannot yet answer. I need to review your personal records and interview your senior staff." "You will not have access to my records," Casimir said flatly. "I have served this court for 2 centuries. I will not be investigated by a mortal accountant who has been here 2 weeks. Iskander's voice cut through the hall like ice. "You will provide Miss Carver with everything she requests, Casimir, or you will explain to me why you are refusing to cooperate with an audit that I ordered." The 2 vampires stared at each other, and the tension in the room could have shattered glass. Casimir looked away first. "As you command, my king." "Good." Iskander's gaze moved to Hanna. "Continue." Hanna pulled up the timeline. The theft began 6 years ago with small amounts less than 50,000 euros annually. It increased gradually each year, which suggests the thief gained confidence as the theft went unnoticed. The most recent year shows losses of over 1.5 million euros, which indicates either greed or desperation. "Or arrogance," Vivian said softly. "Someone who believes they will not be caught." "Possibly," Hanna agreed. She highlighted another section of the data. "There's a second pattern that concerns me. The phantom transactions cluster around dates when the court was managing high-value shipments, weapons, pharmaceuticals, rare materials. Those shipments would have drawn Iskander's attention and required detailed reporting, which means the regular treaty income would have received less scrutiny." Constantine smiled. "So our thief is smart enough to hide in the noise. That narrows the field considerably." "It narrows it to someone with access to the shipping schedules and the court calendar," Hanna said. "Which is still a significant number of people." Drakov spoke for the first time, his voice rough. "This is pointless. The mortal is guessing. She has no proof, only patterns in numbers. Execute the clerk and be done with it." "The clerk is a tool," Iskander said. "I want the hand that wielded him." "Then question him under compulsion," Drakov said. "He will tell you everything." "He is mortal," Vivian said. "Compulsion would break his mind. The information would be unreliable." "Then turn him and question him after," Drakov said. Hanna spoke before she could stop herself. "You can't turn someone without their consent just to interrogate them. That's slavery." The hall went silent. Drakov stood slowly, his eyes fixed on Hanna. "You dare lecture me on our laws, mortal? I dare state that forcible turning violates 3 different EU human rights conventions and the Lisbon Treaty of 1998, Hanna said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "If this court wants to maintain its legal standing with the Portuguese government, it cannot engage in practices that would void the treaty protections." Iskander laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, but it broke the tension like a hammer through ice. "She is correct, Drakov. Sit down." Drakov sat, but his glare could have melted steel. "Miss Carver will continue her investigation using legal methods," Iskander said. "She will have full access to all records she requires, and all members of this court will cooperate. When she identifies the thief, I will handle the consequences. Are there any other questions?" No one spoke. "Then this session is concluded." Iskander stood. "Miss Carver, with me." Hanna followed him out of the hall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. They walked through the corridors in silence until they reached her office, and Iskander closed the door behind them. "That was either very brave or very stupid," he said. "Probably both," Hanna admitted. She set her tablet on the desk and sat down before her legs gave out. "I shouldn't have argued with a high lord in open court. You argued with facts, not emotion. Drakov may not like it, but he cannot refute it." Iskander moved to the window, looking out at the black water. "You are not afraid of me." It wasn't a question, but Hanna answered anyway. "Should I be? Most mortals are." Most mortals haven't spent their careers auditing organized crime operations. Vampires are just another kind of dangerous client. She pulled up her files again. I need to interview Antonio tomorrow. Will you arrange it? I will have him brought here at sunset. Iskander turned from the window. You handled yourself well tonight, Miss Carver. The Lords respect competence, and you demonstrated it. But Drakov is proud and old, and he will not forget that a mortal corrected him. Be cautious. I'm always cautious. Caution is good. Fear is better. Fear keeps mortals alive in courts like mine. Iskander moved toward the door. Finish your work for tonight and rest. Tomorrow will be more difficult. He left, and Hanna sat in the silence of her office and tried to stop shaking. The interview with Antonio Ferreira was scheduled for sunset the next day, but he never arrived. Severin came to her office at 8 with a grim expression. Antonio is gone. His apartment is empty, and his bank accounts were cleaned out sometime yesterday. He ran. Hanna closed her eyes. Someone warned him. Obviously, the question is who? Severin leaned against the doorframe. Iskander is questioning the entire shipping office staff. It's not going well. Define not going well. He's very angry and very controlled, which is worse than if he were shouting. 2 clerks have already resigned. Severin grimaced. He wants to see you in the archive. Now. The archive was cold and smelled like old paper and preservation chemicals. Iskander stood in the center of the main room, surrounded by filing cabinets that stretched to the ceiling, reading a ledger that looked like it dated to the 1800s. He looked up when Hanna entered. The leak came from within the court. Antonio was warned between the time I announced your investigation and the time he was supposed to appear for questioning. That gives us a window of approximately 18 hours. Who knew about the interview? Hanna asked. Everyone in the hall last night. The 4 high lords and their households, approximately 40 vampires and a dozen mortal staff. Iskander set the ledger down. One of them is either the thief or loyal to the thief. Or Antonio had a contingency plan in case he was discovered, and the timing is coincidental. I do not believe in coincidence. Iskander's pale eyes were hard. Someone in my court is betraying me, Miss Carver, and you are going to help me find them. They worked through the night, pulling records and cross-referencing names. Hanna built a network map of the shipping office staff, tracking who reported to whom and who had access to which systems. Iskander provided historical context, pointing out relationships and alliances that went back decades or centuries. By dawn, they had a list of 12 vampires who had both the access and the knowledge to orchestrate the theft. Casimir is on this list, Hanna said, highlighting his name. I know. Iskander's voice was flat. He has been my right hand for 200 years. If he is the thief, it will destroy the court's stability. Do you think he is? I think loyalty is not the same as honesty, and even old friendships can fracture under the right pressure. Iskander closed the file. Continue the investigation. I will watch Casimir. The days blurred together after that. Hanna worked 18-hour shifts, pulling records and building timelines, and Iskander was a constant presence in her office, reviewing her findings and asking questions that forced her to defend her conclusions. They developed a rhythm. She would present a theory, he would challenge it, and they would argue until the logic was sound or the theory collapsed. She learned that he had been turned during the Renaissance in Venice, that he had claimed Lisbon during the Reconstruction after the 1755 earthquake, and that he valued order above almost everything else. She learned that he drank blood from willing donors who were paid well for their service, that he had not killed anyone in over 50 years, and that he played chess at a level that suggested he'd had centuries to practice. She learned that when he was angry, his voice got quieter, and when he was amused, his eyes warmed from ice to smoke. And she learned that she was falling for him, which was possibly the stupidest thing she had ever done. It happened slowly, then all at once. The way he brought her coffee without being asked. The way he listened when she talked, not just to the words, but to the meaning underneath. The way he stood between her and the High Lords during court sessions, a silent promise that no one would touch her while he lived. The way he looked at her sometimes, like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve, or a treasure he hadn't expected to find. She didn't say anything. She was mortal and temporary, and he was a vampire king who measured his life in centuries. There was no future in wanting him, but she wanted him anyway. 3 weeks into the investigation, Hanna found the break she needed. It came from the banking records, not the shipping files. Vivian had provided access to the court's financial accounts, and buried in 5 years of transactions, Hanna found a pattern of wire transfers to a holding company in Luxembourg that had no clear business purpose. The holding company was owned by a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, which was owned by a trust in Liechtenstein, which was managed by a law firm in Geneva. It took her 4 days to untangle the ownership structure, and when she finally traced it back to the source, she sat staring at the screen for a full minute, her heart sinking. The trust was owned by Casimir. She printed the documentation, locked her office, and went to find Iskander. He was in his private quarters, a set of rooms in the oldest part of the building that still had the original tilework on the walls. She'd never been inside before, but the door was open, and he was sitting at a desk by the window, reading something on a tablet. He looked up when she knocked. "Miss Carver, it's 4 a.m. I found the thief." She held out the printed pages. "It's Casimir." Iskander's expression went very still. He took the pages and read through them slowly, his face showing nothing. When he finished, he set the papers on the desk and stood. "Show me the source documents." They went to her office, and Hanna pulled up the files, walking him through the shell companies and the wire transfers and the timeline that showed Casimir had been siphoning money from the court for over 5 years. Iskander listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he stood silent for a long moment. 6.2 million euros, he said finally. "For what purpose?" "I don't know yet. The money is still in the Luxembourg account. He hasn't spent it." "Then it is not greed." Iskander's voice was cold. "It is either leverage or insurance. He is preparing to leave or preparing to fight." "Leave the court?" "Or challenge me for it." Iskander pulled up another file. "Casimir is old enough and powerful enough to claim kingship if he can prove I am unfit to rule. Evidence of financial mismanagement would support such a claim." Hanna stared at him. "He's been stealing from you to make you look incompetent so he can take your place?" "It is a classic strategy. Undermine the king's authority, create chaos, position yourself as the solution." Iskander's eyes were the color of winter storms. "And it would have worked if you had not found the pattern. What are you going to do?" "Call a blood court," Iskander said. "Present the evidence, and give Casimir a choice between exile and execution." The blood court was called for the following night, and every vampire in Lisbon with rank or standing attended. The hall was packed with immortals in formal dress, and the air smelled like expensive cologne and old violence. Hanna stood beside Iskander at the front of the hall, her tablet in hand, while Casimir was brought forward by 2 guards. His face was calm, but his eyes were calculating. "Casimir of the Gravori court," Iskander said, his voice carrying through the hall. "You are accused of theft, embezzlement, and conspiracy to undermine my rule. The evidence will be presented by Miss Hanna Carver. You will have the opportunity to respond." Hanna pulled up her files and projected them onto the screen. She walked the court through the phantom transactions, the shell companies, and the wire transfers, her voice steady and professional. When she finished, she highlighted the final piece of evidence, a transfer of 50,000 euros from Casimir's personal account to Antonio Ferreira, dated the day after the court session where the audit had been announced. This payment was made to Antonio Ferreira, the clerk who processed the phantom transactions and who disappeared before he could be questioned, Hanna said. "The timing suggests it was a payment to secure his silence or facilitate his escape." Iskander looked at Casimir. "Do you deny the evidence?" "I do not," Casimir said. His voice was calm. "The transactions are real. The money is mine. I took it." A murmur ran through the hall. "Why?" Iskander asked. Casimir met his eyes. "Because you have ruled this court for 270 years, old friend, and in that time you have become complacent. You trust too easily. You value order over strength, and you have brought a mortal into our most private affairs, giving her access to secrets that should remain ours alone." He gestured to Hanna. "She is mortal, temporary, fragile, and yet you have placed her above your own lords, allowed her to question us, to investigate us, to sit in judgment of vampires who have walked this earth for centuries. It is an insult to our kind, and proof that you are no longer fit to lead." Iskander's expression didn't change. "So you stole from the court to prove I was incompetent, and when that failed, you paid a mortal clerk to disappear so the investigation would stall and the evidence would be lost." "I did what was necessary to protect this court from weak leadership," Casimir said. "And the 6 million euros in Luxembourg, what was that for?" Casimir smiled. "Insurance. In case you discovered the theft and I needed to disappear quickly, or in case I decided to start my own court elsewhere, free from your outdated ideals." Iskander nodded slowly. "You have served me for 2 centuries, Casimir. You have been my right hand, my advisor, and my friend. I valued your counsel and trusted your loyalty. But loyalty without honesty is betrayal dressed in better clothes." He stepped down from the dais and walked toward Casimir, and the hall went silent. "I am giving you a choice," Iskander said. "Exile or execution. If you choose exile, you will leave Lisbon tonight and never return. You will surrender all claim to this court, all property within our territory, and all alliances with our houses. You will be alone, Casimir. No court will take you once they learn you betrayed your king. And if I choose execution, then I will make it quick, for the sake of the centuries we shared." Iskander's voice was soft. "But you will still be dead, and the result will be the same. I will rule this court, alone if necessary." Casimir looked around the hall, at the vampires who had served under him and the lords who had stood beside him. None of them met his eyes. "Exile," he said finally. Iskander nodded. "Then go. You have until dawn to be beyond our borders." Casimir turned and walked out of the hall, his back straight and his head high, and no one moved until he was gone. Then Iskander turned to the assembled court. "The theft has been identified and the thief exiled. Miss Carver's audit will continue until all irregularities are resolved. Anyone found to have assisted Casimir in his theft will face the same choice he did. This court is built on trust, and I will not tolerate betrayal." He looked at Hanna. "Miss Carver, you have my thanks and my protection. Your work has saved this court from collapse." Hanna inclined her head, not trusting herself to speak. The court session ended, and the hall emptied slowly. Hanna stood beside the screen, shutting down her tablet, when Vivian approached. "That was well done," the vampire said. "Casimir was arrogant enough to believe he would never be caught. You proved him wrong." "I just followed the numbers," Hanna said. "Numbers do not care about politics or pride. That makes them powerful tools in the hands of the right person." Vivian's dark eyes studied her. "Iskander chose well when he hired you." "He didn't hire me. He gave me a choice, which is why he chose well." Vivian smiled faintly. "Be careful, Miss Carver. The king values you, and that makes you valuable to those who would influence him." She left, and Hanna stood alone in the empty hall, wondering what the hell that meant. She found out 2 nights later when Constantine appeared in her office doorway with a bottle of wine and a smile that was all teeth. "Miss Carver," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." Hanna saved her work and closed her laptop. "What can I do for you, Lord Constantine?" "I wanted to thank you for your excellent work uncovering Casimir's theft. The court is stronger without traitors in positions of power." He set the wine on her desk. "I also wanted to extend an invitation. I'm hosting a gathering at one of my clubs tomorrow night. Music, dancing, beautiful people. You should come." "I'm not really the club type." "Then it will be a new experience." Constantine's smile widened. "Iskander works you too hard, Miss Carver. You should take a night to enjoy yourself." "I enjoy my work." "That's what Iskander said you would say." Constantine leaned against the doorframe. "He also said I was not to bother you, but I thought I would ask anyway. You are interesting, Miss Carver. Mortals usually fear us or want to become us. You seem to want neither." "I want to do my job and be left alone to do it," Hanna said. How refreshingly boring. Constantine pushed off the doorframe. The offer stands if you change your mind. And the wine is a gift, not a bribe. It's a 1947 Chateau d'Yquem, which is older than most mortals you'll ever meet, and significantly more valuable. He left, and Hanna looked at the bottle sitting on her desk. She had no idea what a 1947 Chateau d'Yquem was worth, but she suspected it was more than her monthly salary. She took the bottle to Iskander's quarters that night and knocked on the door. He opened it wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and no shoes, which was the most casual she'd ever seen him. "Miss Carver, is something wrong? Constantine gave me this, and I don't know what to do with it." She held out the bottle. "Is it a bribe?" Iskander took the bottle and studied the label. "No. If Constantine wanted to bribe you, he would offer you immortality or a position in his household. This is him being charming, which is more dangerous. Should I give it back? You should share it with me, since I suspect he chose it to annoy me." Iskander stepped aside. "Come in. I'll find glasses." Hanna stepped into his quarters, her heart beating too fast. The sitting room was beautiful high ceilings, tall windows, and furniture that looked antique without being uncomfortable. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes in a dozen different languages, and a chess set sat on a side table mid-game. Iskander returned with 2 wine glasses and a corkscrew. He opened the bottle with practiced ease and poured 2 generous measures. "To accountants who cannot be bribed," he said, handing her a glass. "To vampire kings who burn contracts," Hanna replied. They drank, and the wine was extraordinarily sweet and complex, and unlike anything she'd ever tasted. "Why did Constantine give this to me?" Hanna asked. "Because he is testing you and testing me. He wants to see if you can be influenced, and he wants to see if I will react to him paying attention to you." Iskander set his glass down. "Constantine is charming and ambitious, and he understands people better than any vampire I know. He is also loyal in his way. He would not have given you the wine if he thought you were corruptible." "So it's a compliment?" "In Constantine's language, yes." Hanna sipped the wine and looked around the room. "You play chess?" "For 3 centuries. Would you like to play?" "I'm terrible at it." "Then I will teach you." They sat at the chess table and Iskander reset the pieces. He walked her through the basic moves and strategies, his voice patient, and they played a slow game that he won easily. Then they played another, and by the 3rd game, Hanna had figured out enough of his patterns to force a stalemate. "You learn quickly," Iskander said. "I'm good at finding patterns." "You are good at many things, Miss Carver." He refilled her wine glass. "How is the audit progressing?" "I've cleared Vivian and Drakov. Their records are clean. Constantine's are a mess, but it's disorganization, not theft. He runs his businesses like an artist, not an accountant." "That sounds accurate." Iskander moved a pawn. "What will you do when the audit is finished?" Hanna hadn't let herself think about it. "I don't know. Go back to London, I suppose." "Would you want to?" She met his eyes. "No." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. "Then stay," Iskander said quietly. "The court needs an accountant, and I need someone I can trust. Stay, Hanna." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the sound of it in his voice made something inside her chest crack open. "I'm mortal," she said. "I'll age. I'll die. In 20 years I'll be old, and you'll still look 30. I know. That doesn't bother you?" Iskander reached across the chessboard and took her hand. His skin was cool and his grip was gentle. "I have lived for 500 years, Hanna. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched friends grow old and die, and I have learned to value the time I have with them rather than mourning the time I will not. 20 years with you would be a gift. 50 would be a miracle. And if you chose to stay beyond that, to become what I am, I would welcome it. But the choice would always be yours." Hanna's throat was tight. "I don't know if I want to be a vampire." "Then don't decide tonight. Stay as you are. Work for me. Let me know you." Iskander's thumb brushed over her knuckles. "And if the day comes when you want forever?" I will give it to you. But if it does not, I will still have been grateful for the time we shared. You're asking me to fall in love with you knowing it has an expiration date. I am asking you to let me fall in love with you, Iskander said, and I suspect I am already halfway there. Hanna set down her wine glass and leaned across the chessboard and kissed him. He went very still for a heartbeat, and then he kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her face. He tasted like wine in winter, and when he pulled her into his lap, she went willingly, her arms wrapping around his neck. This is a terrible idea, she whispered against his mouth. I know, Iskander said, and kissed her again. They ended up in his bed, and it was slow and careful and incandescent. He was gentle with her in a way that suggested he was always aware of his strength, and when she touched the scars on his chest, pale lines that had healed centuries ago, he told her about the battle where he'd earned them and the friend who had saved his life. Afterward, she lay in his arms and listened to the silence where his heartbeat should have been, and she thought about time and mortality and the fact that she was falling in love with someone who would outlive her by centuries. I'm staying, she said into the darkness. Iskander's arms tightened around her. Good. The audit took another month to complete, and by the time Hanna finished, she had restructured the entire court's financial system, implemented new oversight protocols, and trained 3 mortal accountants to help manage the day-to-day bookkeeping. The court's finances were clean, transparent, and efficiently managed for the first time in decades. Iskander threw a celebration in the hall, and vampires and mortals alike drank wine and danced to music that mixed fado with something older. Hanna wore a dress Vivian had insisted on buying for her deep blue silk that made her eyes look darker, and she danced with Iskander while the court watched and smiled. They are talking about us, Iskander murmured in her ear. Let them talk, Hanna said. They are saying the king has taken a mortal lover. You have. Iskander smiled against her hair. I have, and I am keeping her. It should have sounded possessive. Instead, it sounded like a promise. Life in the court settled into a new rhythm. Hanna managed the finances, and Iskander managed the politics, and they worked together with the ease of people who understood each other's strengths. She learned the names of the High Lord's households and the intricacies of vampire etiquette. She sat beside Iskander during court sessions and offered her perspective when he asked for it. She played chess with him in the evenings and lost more often than she won. And she fell deeper in love with him every day. 6 months after Casimir's exile, Hanna's brothers showed up at the port. She was in her office reviewing shipping manifests when Rosa called her. Miss Carver, there are 2 men at the gate claiming to be your brothers. Security wants to know if they should let them in or send them away. Hanna's stomach dropped. Send them away. Are you sure? Yes. And tell security to escort them beyond the 5-kilometer boundary, Iskander's orders. She hung up and stared at her computer screen, her hands shaking. Iskander appeared in her doorway 10 minutes later. Your brothers are here. I know. I told security to remove them. They are claiming they need to speak with you. They say it is urgent. Iskander's expression was neutral. What do you want to do? Hanna thought about Marco and David, who had sold her to cover their debts, who had disappeared on a ship to Macau without a word of apology. She thought about the contract Iskander had burned and the 6 months she had spent building a life in Lisbon that had nothing to do with cleaning up their messes. I want them gone, she said. Iskander nodded. Then they will be gone. But Hanna, they are not leaving. They have been camped outside the boundary for 3 days. Whatever they want, they are desperate enough to risk my anger to get it. They're always desperate. It's not my problem anymore. It is if their presence is distressing you. Iskander crossed the room and took her hands. Let me speak with them. I will find out what they want and send them away. You do not have to see them. Hanna wanted to say yes. She wanted Iskander to handle it the way he handled everything else efficiently, finally, and without mercy. But they were still her brothers, and some stupid part of her needed to know why they had come back. I'll talk to them, she said. But you're coming with me. They met Marco and David at the port gate at sunset. The brothers looked terrible, thinner than Hanna remembered, with the kind of exhaustion that came from months of running and no safe place to land. Marco saw her first. Hanna, thank God. We need to talk to you. You have 5 minutes, Hanna said, and then you leave and you don't come back. We're sorry, David said. His voice was hoarse. We're so sorry, Hanna. We fucked up. We know that, but we need help. You sold me to cover your debt, Hanna said flatly. You don't get to ask me for help. The people we owe in Macau are going to kill us, Marco said. We can't run anymore. We need protection. We need to come back to Lisbon. No. Hanna, please. I said no. Hanna's voice was cold. You made your choices, Marco. You and David decided that your debts were more important than my safety, and you signed a contract that would have made me property. You don't get to come back now and ask me to fix the consequences. We didn't know what else to do, David said. We were desperate. So was I when your choices dragged me to Lisbon in the middle of the night. But I didn't sell you to strangers. I built a life here, and you're not part of it. Marco looked past her to Iskander, who had been standing silent and watchful. You're the king. You can give us protection, sanctuary or whatever you call it. Iskander's voice was ice. I could, but I will not. We're her family. You are the men who sold her, Iskander said. You have no claim on her loyalty, her assistance, or her forgiveness. And you have no claim on my protection. Leave Lisbon. Do not return. If I see you within my territory again, I will kill you both and consider it a public service. David's face went white. Hanna, please. We're your brothers. You stopped being my brothers when you signed that contract, Hanna said. Goodbye, Marco. Goodbye, David. She turned and walked back into the port, and Iskander followed her. Behind them, she heard Marco shouting something, but she didn't look back. In her office, she sat down at her desk and tried to stop shaking. Iskander closed the door and leaned against it. Are you all right? I don't know. Hanna pressed her hands flat against the desk. They're going to get themselves killed. Probably. And that's not my fault. No, it is theirs. Hanna looked up at him. Why aren't I sad? They're my brothers. I should feel something. You feel angry, Iskander said gently, and relief, and guilt because you think you should mourn people who treated you as disposable. But Hanna, you do not owe loyalty to people who betrayed you, not even if they share your blood. What if the people in Macau come looking for them here? Then I will handle it. Iskander crossed the room and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. You are under my protection, Hanna. Not because your brothers sold you, not because you work for me, but because you are mine, and I protect what is mine. It should have sounded possessive. Instead, it sounded like safety. Hanna buried her face in his chest and let herself breathe. 2 weeks later, word reached Lisbon that Marco and David Carver had been found dead in a shipping container in Singapore. The details were sparse, but the method suggested professional execution. Iskander told her in his quarters, his voice gentle, and Hanna sat on his sofa and stared at the chessboard and felt nothing. I should be sad, she said finally. You should feel however you feel, Iskander said. There is no correct way to grieve people who hurt you. They were idiots and assholes, but they were still my brothers. Yes. Hanna leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They sat in silence for a long time, and eventually Hanna said, I want to stay here, in Lisbon, with you, for as long as I can. You have that, Iskander said, for as long as you want it. What happens when I get old? I will still want you. What happens when I die? Iskander was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I will mourn you, and I will be grateful that I had you at all. Hanna turned to look at him. And if I wanted to stay longer? If I wanted forever? Iskander's pale eyes searched hers. Are you asking me to turn you? I'm asking if the offer is real. If you meant it when you said the choice would be mine. I meant it. Hanna took a breath. Then I want it. Not now, not yet, but someday, when I've lived enough of a mortal life to know what I'm giving up. I want to stay with you, Iskander. I want forever." Iskander cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, and it tasted like promises and time and the future they were choosing together. "Then you will have it," he said against her mouth. "When you are ready, I will give you forever." 5 years passed. Hanna turned 33, and Iskander threw her a birthday party in the hall with cake and champagne and a chess set made of carved ivory that was older than Portugal. She managed the court's finances and trained a staff of mortal accountants who were loyal and competent and terrified of disappointing her. She learned to navigate vampire politics and earned the respect of the High Lords through sheer competence and refusal to be intimidated. She and Iskander lived together in his quarters, and she learned every scar on his body and every story that came with them. She learned that he read poetry in Italian and played the piano when he thought no one was listening. She learned that he was fiercely protective and deeply kind, and that he loved her with the intensity of someone who had lived long enough to know how rare real connection was. And she learned that she wanted to spend eternity with him. On a spring night when the Tagus smelled like rain and flowers, Hanna told Iskander she was ready. They were in his quarters playing chess, and she moved her queen into position and said, "I want you to turn me." Iskander's hand paused over his bishop. "Are you certain?" "I've been certain for a year. I just needed to be sure I wasn't deciding out of fear of losing you. But I'm not. I'm deciding because I want forever with you. And I want to see what the world looks like in 100 years, and I want to be strong enough to stand beside you instead of behind you." Iskander set down his bishop. "Turning is painful. The transition takes 3 days, and you will feel like you are dying because you are. And when you wake, you will be different, stronger, faster, hungry. You will have to learn to control instincts that did not exist when you were mortal." "I know. I've read the literature. I've talked to Severin and Vivian. I'm ready. There is no going back, Hanna." "I don't want to go back. I want to go forward, with you." Iskander stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms. "If I do this, you will be mine in ways that go beyond what we have now. Maker and fledgling bonds are deep and complicated, and they do not break easily." "Good," Hanna said. "I want to be bound to you. I want everything, Iskander. All of it." He kissed her then, fierce and claiming, and when he pulled back his eyes were storm gray and full of something that might have been joy or might have been fear. "Then I will give you everything," he said. "Tomorrow night. We will do it properly, with witnesses and ceremony, so the court knows you are choosing this freely." The turning ceremony was held in the hall at midnight, and every vampire in Iskander's court attended. Hanna wore a white dress that Vivian had commissioned, simple and elegant, and she walked to the center of the hall where Iskander waited in formal black. The High Lords stood as witnesses, Vivian and Drakov and Constantine, who had become an unlikely friend over the years. The mortal staff lined the edges of the hall, and Rosa stood in the front row with tears in her eyes. Iskander took Hanna's hands and spoke the old words, the ritual formula that made clear this was choice and gift, not compulsion or punishment. He asked her 3 times if she understood what she was choosing, and 3 times she said yes. Then he drew a knife across his palm and offered her his blood, and she drank. It tasted like copper and iron in winter, and the moment it touched her tongue, the world tilted sideways. Iskander caught her as her knees buckled, and he bit into his own wrist and pressed it to her mouth. "Drink," he said softly. "Drink and let go. I will bring you back." Hanna drank, and the world went away. The transition was agony, fire in her veins and ice in her lungs, and the feeling that her body was being taken apart and rebuilt from the inside out. She heard voices, Iskander's mostly, low and steady, talking to her through the pain. She felt his hands holding hers, his presence a constant anchor. And then, on the 3rd day, she opened her eyes, and the world was different. Everything was sharper, brighter. She could hear the blood moving through Iskander's veins and the sound of footsteps 3 floors below. She could smell the age of the stone in the walls and the salt from the river and the faint scent of Rosa's perfume from hours ago. And she was hungry. Iskander was sitting beside the bed, watching her. "Welcome back." Hanna sat up, and the movement was too fast, too smooth. I can hear your blood. I know. The hunger will be intense for the first few weeks. We will manage it together. He offered her a glass of something dark red. Drink. It will help. Hanna took the glass and drank, and the hunger eased to something manageable. How long was I out? 3 days. You transitioned smoothly. No complications. I feel different. You are different. Stronger. Faster. Immortal. Iskander reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, and his touch sent sparks across her skin. How do you feel? Like I could run to Spain and back, like I could tear through a brick wall, like I want to kiss you until the world ends. Iskander smiled, and it was warm and real and full of relief. The last one is doable. The first two we will work on. He kissed her, and it was different now that they were matched, stronger, deeper. She could feel the bond between them, maker and fledgling, a connection that went soul deep and would not break. When they finally pulled apart, Hanna said, "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me forever." "Thank you for choosing it," Iskander said, "for choosing me." They spent the first month teaching Hanna control how to move at human speeds, how to manage the hunger, how to read the subtle cues of vampire social hierarchy. She learned to hunt from volunteers who came to the court specifically to donate blood, and she learned that feeding could be intimate or impersonal depending on how she approached it. She learned that sunlight would burn her now, so her windows were fitted with blackout shades, and she adjusted her schedule to match the court's nocturnal rhythm. She learned that her strength was significant, but still less than Iskander's, and they sparred in the training hall until she could hold her own against him for more than 30 seconds. And she learned that immortality changed her perspective on time. Deadlines felt less urgent, centuries stretched out ahead instead of decades, and the idea of spending 500 years with Iskander felt not like forever, but like a gift. 6 months after her turning, Vivian stepped down as High Lord of Banking and recommended Hanna as her replacement. "You have the skills and the respect of the court," Vivian said over wine in her quarters. "And Iskander needs someone in that position he can trust completely. I am tired, Hanna. I have managed the court's money for 3 centuries. I want to travel. I want to see what the world looks like now that I am not chained to a ledger." "You're not chained." "I am. By choice, yes, but still chained, and you are better suited to the work than I ever was. You love numbers the way I love music. Let me retire and take my place." Hanna looked at the vampire who had been mentor and friend, and she understood. "Where will you go?" "Everywhere. Japan, New Zealand, Argentina, places I have not seen in 100 years. Vivian smiled. "And I will come back when I am ready. But for now, I want to be free. Say yes, Hanna." "Yes," Hanna said. The court session where she was formally invested as High Lord of Banking was held on a winter night when the Tagus was cold and dark. Hanna wore the formal robes Vivian had passed to her, deep green velvet embroidered with silver, and she knelt before Iskander while he spoke the old words that bound her to the court and the responsibilities of her position. When she rose, she was no longer just Iskander's lover or the court's accountant. She was High Lord Hanna Carver, and she had the authority to manage the court's wealth and the power to enforce her decisions. Constantine caught her after the ceremony. "Congratulations, my dear. You have climbed higher in 5 years than most vampires do in a century." "I'm just doing the work," Hanna said. "You are doing more than that. You are building something permanent, a legacy." Constantine's smile was sharp. "Just remember that power attracts enemies. Be careful, Hanna." "I'm always careful." "Good, because Iskander is very much in love with you, and if anything happened to you, he would burn the world to ash." Constantine walked away, and Hanna stood in the hall surrounded by vampires who had accepted her as one of their own, and she thought about the contract Iskander had burned 6 years ago and the life she had built from its ashes. That night in their quarters, she and Iskander stood at the window looking out over the port. "Do you regret it?" Iskander asked quietly. "Choosing this life?" "Never," Hanna said. "This is the best choice I ever made." "Even though you can never go back? Even though you will outlive every mortal you knew?" "I didn't have many mortals I cared about," Hanna said. "And the ones I did have, I've already said goodbye to." This is my life now, Iskander. You, the court, the work we do together, and I love it." Iskander pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the darkness, two immortals who had found each other against all odds and chosen forever. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I will love you for as long as we both exist." "That's a long time," Hanna said. "Yes," Iskander agreed, "and I am looking forward to every moment of it." Below them, the port glowed with lights, and the river carried ships toward the sea. The court was stable, the finances were clean, and the future stretched out ahead of them like an open road. Hanna leaned into Iskander's embrace and smiled, because she was exactly where she belonged, and forever had never looked so bright.